Time now for Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire.
So Keir Starmer says his Labour manifesto is a serious plan for government. Is it ambitious enough for you? And it's just finished, the latest seven-way election debate on ITV, where Labour's Angela Rayner faced attacks from all sides on tax and migration. Hi, good evening. Welcome to Newsnight Live with insight and interviews. Let me introduce you to our panel this evening. The political editor of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorpe, is here. Good evening to you. And head teacher, Catherine Burwell-Singh, who is the former chair of the Social Mobility Commission and who runs the highest achieving school in England, according to government figures. Welcome to you. Later, we're going to talk live to Labour's Darren Jones about the Labour manifesto out today, as you know. Is it enough for you? First, let's go live to Nick, who's in Salford, where the second seven-way debate has just finished. Nick, what are people saying in the spin room?
Well, Vic, I've seen three members of the shadow cabinet saying what you'd expect them to say, which is, didn't Angela Rayner do a marvellous job? I have not seen a single full member of the cabinet saying what a marvellous job Penny Mordaunt did. I've seen Andrew Mitchell, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, saying exactly that. Penny Mordaunt did a great job, but he is not a full member of the cabinet. And the other one speaking up for Penny Mordaunt is David Davis, the former cabinet minister. One Tory source said to me they think cabinet ministers have taken to the hills because they are so worried about the way that the Conservative election campaign is going. So this debate tonight was a bit of a trot round a familiar course. There were some fiery exchanges, but some of them looked pretty sort of tired, I thought. The really interesting moment was when the candidates were able to ask one question to one of the candidates. Interestingly, four turned on Angela Rayner. You got the impression that at least all the people in that hall have a pretty clear idea which way this election is going. Three put questions to Penny Mordaunt. And interestingly, Nigel Farage, in his question to Penny Mordaunt, he said, why should I believe a word of what you say because of your broken promises on immigration? Then Penny Mordaunt said to him, well, you're a Labour enabler. If you vote for Nigel Farage, you get Keir Starmer. And he said, oh no, we've just overtaken you in the polls. So if you vote Conservative, Nigel Farage said, you get Labour.
Your party is committed to continuing with £18 billion worth of public sector. Don't shake your head. This isn't my words, this is the IFS. The IFS have outlined the conspiracy of silence between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party on £18 billion worth of public sector cuts. How is that going to help public sector services? It's not.
At the moment, we've had flat growth and really poor growth in this country, and we're not going to be able to tax our way out of the disastrous situation the Tories have left us in. But what we are going to do is we're going to have a growth strategy with an industrial strategy, with a skills strategy, which will enable us to grow the economy so that we can pay for our public services. We can't tax our way out of this. We've got the highest tax burden
but that is
in
exactly
70
what
years.
you're going to do.
Good.
You have a black hole of 38.5 billion. Their manifesto was published today.
Black holes.
Labour's manifesto was published today. 38.5 billion is the tax gap in their plans. And the only way, because public spending is going to have to go up, that's the demand. The only way they are going to be able to do that is to raise taxes.
Nick, you mentioned one of the polls, or what Nigel Farage had said, but there have been a number of polls out today. Just talk our audience through them. Hi, Nick, can you hear me? I don't think he can. No. Oh dear, that's a shame. Apologies. We'll sort out the technicals. Goodness me, it was all going so well. Thank goodness Liam is sitting on the sofa and Catherine is as well. What did you take from that debate?
I think what Nick said is really interesting, that it seemed to be all guns were really turned on Angela Rayner.
What does that tell you?
That tells you that everyone thinks that she is going to be the next Deputy Prime Minister. She's going to be at the heart of government. It almost felt like, and it has felt that it's a while, that the Conservatives aren't really being listened to, almost a bit of an irrelevance in this debate, sort of shouting from the sidelines about this disputed tax figure that they keep coming back with because they don't really have anything else to stand on in terms of their record. I think Angela Rayner had a tough night at times. I think that, you know, when she's being attacked from her left flank by the Greens, by the SNP, by the Lib Dems, who, with respect, have more licence to say everything that they would want to do. Thought it was particularly tricky for her to kind of defend perhaps the child poverty issue, and that's something that Labour are going to struggle with. But I don't think she'll be too bothered to come out of this debate looking like the person that everyone else was having a go at, because that's what happens when you're in government.
What would you say, Catherine?
Well, I was fascinated by this idea that this poll that Reform might have overtaken the Conservatives, which seemed to be an impossibility. So I'm looking forward.
Nick was going to tell us there are 3 polls out today. One puts Reform 1 percentage point ahead of the Conservatives. Another one puts them 1 percentage point behind. And all the caveats, you know, the only poll that counts is July the 4th, etc., etc. But how do you respond to that?
But the fact that that's happened, they're talking about that now, it's just extraordinary, really. And also, your man Nick saying that all the cabinet members are running for the Hills, it's just an example of really poor leadership. In any organisation, when the leader at the top is somewhat hollow, everything else falls apart. And I feel a bit sorry for the Conservative MPs, because I think that's what's happened to them.
Are you saying Rishi Sunak is hollow?
Yes, I am saying that.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I don't think he really believes in anything. And
What's your evidence for saying that?
Well, for instance, the D-Day nonsense. I mean, why did he leave? Why doesn't he believe in D-Day? Why doesn't he? I feel as if he doesn't really believe in his country. But even if you say, oh, no, he does, why wasn't there something? Well, he says so, but his actions say otherwise. And I think that, you know, why is there nothing inside him? I'd be too embarrassed to leave. I mean, I wouldn't leave because I believe in D-Day, but even if I didn't, I'd just be too embarrassed. And I just, I find it very odd that he wasn't too embarrassed to leave.
I think you're just seeing, you know, with the lack of cabinet ministers, you can barely find a cabinet minister to go on the broadcast rounds to defend. It seems to be Mel Stride every single day, because they don't want to be associated with what is going to be a cataclysmic result. And whatever that is left of the Conservative Party after July the 4th, and we know that the machinations are already underway in terms of who's going to lead the Tories next, I don't think they want to be associated with a historically bad defeat. So that's why you're not seeing them in the spin rooms. That's why you're not seeing them as much on the broadcast rounds. They're done. They're defeated. It's over. And I think they know that.
But as you say, when it comes to leadership and you are a team, whatever battle you're fighting, whether it's losing or otherwise, aren't you supposed to stick it out till the fat lady sings?
Yeah, but the buck always stops with the leader. And it's a fascinating view that we have now of what happens to an organisation when the leadership fails. It's what it would happen in any school, it would happen in any business, and it's just really sad to see it happen to the Conservative Party.
It's a decimation. And, you know, we talk about Canada 93. We don't know what the Conservative Party is going to look like after July the 4th. And it was interesting to see Nigel Farage today almost pitching himself as the potential opposition leader.
Yeah. And, well, he said on the radio this morning, I was listening to LBC, and he told Nick Ferrari, I would be very happy to lead some kind of reformed centre-right party.
And, you know, that there are Conservatives who agree with him. And you saw tonight Penny Mordaunt found it very difficult to kind of combat the Nigel Farage element, because actually, as Catherine says, that polling that you see, which would have been absolutely mind-boggling a couple of years ago, is remarkable. That it says much more about the descent of the Tory party, I think, than the growth of reform. But it just shows that from both sides, they are a toxic brand now. And you know, what happens next with the Tory party will be absolutely fascinating. Yeah,
and interesting when you think it is said that one of the reasons Mr Sunak called a snap election was so that reform couldn't get its ducks in a row.
And look at what it's done
in
a short period of time.
Yeah.
OK, so what would Labour do if they form the next government? They tried to answer that with their manifesto, which was out today. There were no surprises, which Sir Keir Starmer said he was unapologetic about.
I am not going to do what Rishi Sunak did, which is to offer things that he can't deliver because they're unfunded. People have had too much of that. They're fed up with that. This is a serious plan, carefully thought through. It's not about rabbits out the hat. It's not about pantomime. We've had that. I'm running as a candidate to be Prime Minister, not a candidate to run the circus. Thank you very much, Beth.
We're going to talk live to Darren Jones, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, in just a few minutes. First, Ben is here. He does policy and analysis and economics. Welcome back to Newsnight. It's so nice to see you. Right, what does Labour's manifesto tell us about their tax and spending plans?
Well, this Labour manifesto has one single title, which was change. But from a tax and spending point of view, Victoria, a more fitting title would have been no change, really. There's about £7 billion of extra taxes they're taking in, a similar amount of extra spending, but that's pretty small beer in economic terms, in truth. By my calculations, it adds up to about 0.2% of GDP, and I think we can see a chart which really puts that in perspective in respect to the other political parties. So there you've got the Conservatives' tax cuts, amounting to about 0.6% of GDP, and then the Lib Dems spending rises 0.8. So you see Labour is smaller than that. But what really puts this into perspective is if you compare it to the 2017 and 2019 Labour Party manifesto commitments, you can see they're much, much higher. Those were, of course, Jeremy Corbyn's plans. Now, in fairness, Labour does have a plan to spend more on capital spending, a bit more on investment. That should help. An industrial strategy as well will help. But really, there's nothing in this manifesto that people are seeing which is really going to move the dial on growth. And growth matters because, of course, the manifesto pledges the fastest growth rate in the G7. There's a lot of scepticism among economists tonight, Victoria, that this manifesto in itself is going to deliver that.
OK. What can you tell us about what it says about child poverty?
Well, look, child poverty is in there and it says it's a problem and says it's got a strategy. It's pretty thin in terms of fleshing out that strategy, and it is silent, actually, on this key question of the two-child limit on people claiming benefits. Extraordinary statistic today from the Resolution Foundation, which they estimate that large families, so 3 or more children, by the end of this decade, on current trends, a majority of those, so more than 50%, will be in relative poverty. Again, a lot of scepticism that there's anything in this manifesto that is going to actually change that quite bleak trajectory. OK, thank you very much, Ben. We're going to talk to Darren Jones right now. Hello, Mr. Jones.
Hello, good evening.
I'm so glad you can hear me and we can hear you. Thank you very much for talking to our audience. You say Britain is broken and that you have the answers if people vote for you. But as Ben has just pointed out, and as Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies said today, the numbers in your costings are extraordinarily small. Are you sure your manifesto meets the moment?
Yes, because this is a manifesto for change that we in the Labour Party are ready to deliver if people vote for that change on July the 4th, as we'd heard from Angela Rayner, our Deputy Leader, at the debate this evening, but also Keir Starmer at the launch of our manifesto today. All of our policies are fully funded and fully costed, but of course we're inheriting a complete car crash from the Conservatives. After 14 years of failure, the economy is in the worst position it will be for any incoming government since the Second World War, and we have to reflect that reality as we take some immediate steps with our first 6 steps to inject capital into our frontline public services, but then do the hard yards on getting growth back into the economy, and that's what our manifesto is today, a plan for growth.
And also, the tax take under you, if you win, will be the highest it's ever been. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, we know that the tax burden is the highest it has been for 70 years under the Conservatives. That's why we've made a promise not to increase
higher under
income tax,
you
national insurance
if you
or
win.
VAT over the course of the next Parliament. But you're right to point to the fact that the tax thresholds that we inherit are the tax thresholds that we inherit. We want the tax burden to come down on working people, but we have to do that in a fully funded, sustainable way. Otherwise, you end up in a position, as we did with Liz Truss, and we will do with the Conservatives if they win this election, where your unfunded promises lead to market chaos and an impact on family finances. If you take the Conservative Party promises in their manifesto, we know that there's a direct link to interest rates and then to mortgages. We know that because people are experiencing it as a consequence of Liz Truss. And we're just not willing to make that risk with family finances at this election.
Sure. So you are comfortable with it being the highest tax take ever if you get in?
Well, look, we inherit the world as we find it. We want the tax burden to come down. We're making that commitment not to increase headline rates of income tax, national insurance or VAT. But of course, the tax burden is a fraction of the size of the economy. And because the economy has shrunk under Rishi Sunak, the tax burden is higher. And that's why our plan for growth is so important, because we want success back into the economy for the economy's sake, but also for family finances and workers across the country.
I want to ask you about child poverty, if I may. Government figures estimate that 4.3 million children, or 30% of all children in the UK, 30% of all children in the UK are in poverty. And you cite those figures in your manifesto. But then there's no plan. What is the point of a Labour manifesto without a plan to combat child poverty?
Well, look, child poverty is a tragedy for the country, but also for every child and every family who's affected. And I know how difficult that is, having grown up in those circumstances.
So you think there'd be a plan in your manifesto?
That's why we set out in our manifesto today. So that's why we've set out in our manifesto today a number of initial measures which we know have a direct impact on family finances. For example, free breakfast clubs at school, an enhanced offer on childcare for parents who want to be able to get to work, the banning of Section 21 no-fault evictions for families kicked out of their private rental accommodation, which often spirals families into those poverty situations, and a commitment, yes, to bring together government to put together a child poverty strategy that's fit to meet the needs of families across the country.
OK, pause there then, please,
tackling
Mr.
child
Jones.
poverty is never easy.
So, and a commitment, right? So you're going to make them wait. You're going to make these kids in poverty wait for your economic growth, which may not come.
No. So the free breakfast clubs, the ban on Section 21 evictions, the measures we've announced in our first 6 steps will be immediately implemented if Labour wins the election on July the 4th. Those are all fully funded and fully costed in the way set out in our manifesto today. But we recognise those are first steps. That's why we call them first steps, and that we want to deal with the structural issues this country is facing so that people can feel the benefit of change from Labour if we win on July the 4th.
How many children will free breakfast clubs lift out of poverty?
Well, we know, for example, that many children are coming to school hungry, and that's unacceptable for them, but it's also unacceptable for their education. And so that's why we're going to make sure that free breakfast schools are available, breakfast clubs are available in every primary school across the country for children that want to access them.
And how many will it lift out of child poverty?
Notices of family. Well, the breakfast clubs will be available to all children who go to school, so they'll be able to access them if they wish to do so.
Yeah. And how many will it lift out of child poverty?
Well, it depends on how you look at family finances. As I say, there's a package of measures in the manifesto today that will support families, especially those in vulnerable work with our new deal for working people,
you don't know, do
where
you?
People have irregular incomes or irregular shift patterns.
You don't know.
Well,
but let me tell you what the Resolution Foundation say. If I may, sorry.
Sure.
The Resolution Foundation, which used to be run by one of your own Labour candidates, children in families, 3 or more children, now make up a majority of the total number of children in poverty. They say abolishing the 2-child benefit limit would take 490,000 children out of poverty. So that is an 11% reduction in child poverty overnight. You even have Suella Braverman calling for the cap to be abolished. And Nigel Farage, it would seem, on the ITV debate tonight. Yet you, Labour, won't promise to do that.
Well, that's because the difference between the Conservatives and Reform and Labour is that our policies are fully funded and fully costed. That has to be what people expect from any party trying to form the government at this election. And look, would I like the economy to be in a better position? Of course I would. Would I like a Labour government to be coming into a country where we've got plenty of tax revenues to be able to spend on all the things that we would like to do as the Labour movement? Of course I would. But the fact of the matter is that we will inherit the worst financial situation that any party has inherited since the Second World War. We're going to have to do the hard yards to turn that around, and that means that yes, we've got those 6 steps that we want to get started with immediately, but it will take some time to turn the country around. I think people at home recognise the fact that we can't just click our finger and change that immediately on day one. But our plan for change today and our manifesto sets out how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure voters do recognise that, and they may also recognise that you are making a choice. You could fully fund and fully cost lifting the 2-child benefit cap, and you are making the choice not to do that. That's right, isn't it?
Well, these are trade-offs. We've made the commitment not to increase taxes because the tax burden is already too high on people as a consequence of the Conservative record in government. That means that there's not then additional revenue to pay for some of our additional priorities. But these are the trade-offs that any party has to make if they want to be in government. What you do know you will have from a Labour government, because it's on the pages in our manifesto today, is that we have a credible plan for change with growth and wealth creation anchored in it. That means that with time, we'll be able to bring money to working families across across the country in the way that we've talked about this evening. You either get to vote for that change on July the 4th, or you get to vote for more chaos from the Conservatives, which have had a direct impact on family finances and family well-being to such a detrimental level over these last few years. That's why change is important at this election, even if it's going to be difficult to rebuild Britain after 14 years of failure from the Tories.
Thank you for talking to our audience and for coping with the delays on the line. We appreciate it, Mr Jones. Thank you. Thank you. Liam Thorpe and Catherine Birbalsingh, you are political editor of the Liverpool Echo. You talk to people across Merseyside the whole time. What will they think of this manifesto? Will it be enough?
No, I don't think it will be enough for the people of Merseyside. I think that it will be enough to get Labour elected. I think we all know that. It's what happens next that people will be concerned about. I'm really pleased that you pushed so hard on the child poverty issue. In Merseyside, parts of Merseyside, more than 2 in 3 kids are living in poverty right now. And I was
More than 2 in 3?
More than 2 in 3 in some parts, in the worst parts. I was speaking to a doctor at Alderhay the other day. He's also a professor of public health, and he says that a government can decide what level of child poverty it wants. It is that simple. And as you say, you click your fingers overnight, scrap the 2-child limit, you take, what, 500,000 kids out of poverty? And that will be such a frustration to people that, you know, a Labour government coming in that isn't choosing to do that. I understand the caution. I understand the wanting to be seen as fiscally responsible.
But it is a choice.
But it is a choice. Of course it's a choice. Yeah. Of course it's a choice. Darren Jones says it's a trade-off. I don't really understand what could be more of a trade-off, what could be more of a priority than getting kids out of poverty. And it's about the long-term effect that has on their health, on their lives, on their brain development, you know, all of that stuff. When kids can't eat, they are not developing it the way that they should, and their opportunities in life are forever held back because of that.
What's your experience? Obviously, you deal with primary school children and secondary school children.
Yeah, secondary. I mean, no, I agree with what Liam's saying. What I find odd about the idea of free breakfast clubs is that free breakfast for everyone, I don't really understand. I mean, I understand free breakfast for free school meal children, but why would you want to spend the money giving wealthy children free breakfast when, of course, they most certainly don't need it, especially when there are so many children who really... That's it. I don't really understand the thinking.
The argument often is that it's more expensive or more difficult if you start to means test, whereas if it's universal, you know that those most in need will get it, along with the wealthy ones. You're right.
Why would it be more expensive? The fact is we already know who the free school meal children are, so those are the ones who would be getting the free breakfast, and then you would charge the other ones who come in just like it's the case at lunchtime. I don't really understand it. So I worry a bit sometimes about what Labour are saying, that perhaps, like with that, it hasn't necessarily been thought through.
Has there been enough attention on education in this election campaign for you so far?
No, not at all. And I never know if it's the fault of the politicians or the fault of the public. What I mean is, people always say that education isn't a vote winner, and I don't understand why, when clearly...
It was for Tony Blair in 1997.
Well, yeah, perhaps. I mean, he certainly did talk about it. But they you know, I don't understand. Children are the future. They're the future of any country. They're the most important. They should be the most important people in our families. They should be the most important people to our politicians. And therefore, schools are everything. Because schools are what enable social mobility. Schools are what bring children together. It enables multiculturalism to succeed. It enables a country to come together under one umbrella with a curriculum. Teaching your children, you know, forming your children into kind, decent people who can be part of the future workforce and succeed. I don't understand why we don't talk more about education. And one of my worries about Labour, again, is that the big thing they're talking about is VAT on private schools. And while I think there is an intellectual argument about whether or not they ought to have that advantage with the VAT, it's going to bring in 1.6 billion
to the state sector.
Yeah, on the 116 billion that we spend on education.
Tiny.
It's this drop in the ocean. And then again, like with the free breakfast clubs, I'm sort of thinking, what on earth is going on?
Okay. Economic growth is what Keir Starmer really focused on today. He says it will come. He keeps saying to journalists who ask, look, I think we can do it really quickly. I can pull the levers of planning reform on day one, etc., etc. How long has he got to get growth, to fund schools, hospitals, etc.?
He's got no time at all. And we know that what's coming down the track in terms of what is baked into the economy as it stands, in terms of more severe cuts to unprotected departments. Now, I spend a lot of my time covering local government. It is in the biggest crisis you have ever seen. Councils are going bust all the time. Councils are just about hanging on. They're a shell of their former selves. Local government cannot take any more cuts. The justice system cannot take any more cuts. It's in a complete mess. So if this sort of growth that keeps getting spoken about, and we all hope that Labour will do that, if it doesn't materialise, what is the next option? Because they've ruled out tax rises, so spending cuts.
Well, they've ruled out some.
Well, they've ruled out some tax rises, yeah. And there's been cagey about some others. From my position, Keir Starmer was clear today and said no austerity. We've seen what austerity has done to a city like Liverpool. It's been devastating. It cannot happen again. So we need to know what the plan B is.
Can I ask you, as political editor of the Liverpool Echo, about the Hillsborough law, which Labour have promised in their manifesto? First of all, for those who want to learn more, tell our audience what it means. So the Hillsborough law is essentially trying to level the playing field so that what the Hillsborough families went through for 3 decades doesn't happen to other families. It's a sense of when there's a massive injustice, when there's a massive tragedy, that it's remarkable that we need this, but one of the main laws in the Hillsborough law is that public officials should tell the truth. Now, you might look at me and say, do we need to make that legally mandated? Well, we do, because we've seen through the Hillsborough disaster, the lies and the obfuscation, the smears that were put upon those families. We've seen the Post Office inquiry, we've seen infected blood. In all of these cases, there's a running theme. Grenfell, the nuclear test veterans that we're seeing at the moment, the establishment closes ranks and it punches down on people who, ordinary people who were just unlucky enough to be caught up in such a terrible tragedy. You work in the public sector. Would you back this law?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the thing is, ordinary people need the support of their government, and the laws need to be there to help them.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, this is really, I think Labour should, we're obviously very pleased that Keir Starmer is committed to this. We've, as the Echo, have pushed them on this time and time again. It's in the manifesto. They should go big on this, because if Keir Starmer is saying, I am in the service of working people, I am on your side, this is something that it basically changes the dynamic in the country. The establishment is no longer all-powerful. People have a fighting chance, and we don't see the same kind of injustices that we've seen, shamefully throughout the history of this country.
Thank you for the moment. Plaid Cymru also launched their manifesto today. Let's hear from them and some of the other parties in that 7-way debate on ITV tonight.
And I don't know if the Lib Dems agree with tuition fees or not. They've got quite a record in that regard. I'm sure you can elaborate upon it for all of us.
On the question of tuition fees, we were punished for that. That's democracy. I get that.
Do you still believe in free tuition, though?
As I say, on the point of tuition fees, we were punished for that, right?
But what's your position now? What's your policy now?
In 2015, when we were out of coalition, the thing that the Conservatives did on their own is they removed maintenance grants, the grants that were there for the poorest students to give them a shot at going to university. And we have said that we would put those back in place. But when it comes to education, we will not take lessons
so you still believe in
from the
tuition
SNP.
Fees? You still believe that people should have tens of thousands of pounds of debt?
Schools have fallen down the international rankings rapidly.
Mass migration is making us poorer. You'll hear, GDP's going up. Well, of course it is. There are more people. GDP per capita, our relative wealth, has declined for the last 6 consecutive quarters.
I hear Nigel talking a lot about. I hear Nigel Farage talking a lot about dependence.
Facts.
The problem that we have in higher education now is that changes in visa requirements means that family members aren't able to come and study to accompany students to Welsh universities. That is causing major problems in terms of revenue for our higher education.
You shouldn't bring your mum. You come to university in Britain, you can't bring your mum, can you? I mean, come on.
The rich are getting richer, but the poor are getting poorer. We think it's time to bring fairness back into our economy by asking the billionaires and the multimillionaires to pay a bit more and introducing a £15 minimum wage.
That was a little earlier. This is tomorrow's front pages. Let's start with the Daily Telegraph. Reform overtakes the Tories for the first time. The Daily Mail. What is Labour not telling us about tax hikes? Front page of The Times, conspiracy of silence on cuts and higher taxes. That's certainly what the Institute for Fiscal Studies is suggesting about the two main parties. The Mirror, we will give the nation hope. Pledge to boost the economy and build a brighter future for our children. Words from Sir Keir Starmer. The Guardian, I'll fix Britain, vows Starmer, amid doubts over how he will pay for it, reflecting some of our conversation this evening. And the FT, Starmer unveils an £8.6 billion tax hit in a bid to revive growth and end the Tory chaos. Is there an issue about the conspiracy of silence over possible cuts and possible tax hikes? Paul Johnson said on Newsnight back in January, whoever wins is probably going to have to put up taxes.
I think there's a definite concern about what's coming down the line. I think, as I say, you talk about austerity, those departments that aren't protected, they can't suffer any further cuts. I think, obviously, you look at lots of the papers, they're focused on the tax. I'd be more concerned about the public spending cuts and what that would do to communities in the areas that I operate, and that can't happen.
OK. We're at the end of the programme. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was quick. Tell me about it. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Liam. Really appreciate your company. And thanks for your company as well. Faisal's here tomorrow. Have a very good rest of the evening.
Good evening. We've seen some wet and unusually windy weather for the time of year.